Thank you all so much for coming back out to join us. Last week, we ran out of time and had to hit the pause button, so let's hit play and jump right back into the good stuff. This is more of Jeff Scheel on the 11%.
I watched the Nickelback documentary as well, and Nickelback catches a lot of hate too. And I was like, man. And I can remember I was over in Europe. I was over doing press for 3 weeks before our last record came out. And this is in early 2002 when Nickelback's second record was coming out. And if people, and I'm going to sound like a Nickelback fan all of a sudden, or but the reason I remember all this is because in the States, that second Nickelback record debuted at number 1.
Mm-hmm.
The first record never broke the top 100.
Didn't even make the top 100, and the second
Right.
one came off at number 1.
And so again, and I was in Europe at the time when This Is What You Remind Me. I don't know what the name of that song. If that's the name of this, that could be the name of the song. But I remember because I was over, and even in Europe, that song was blowing up. Even like I'd be like, I was traveling in Europe through the week, and then I would go back to London on the weekends. And I was hearing the song on television, and and I got back to the States, and I don't know that I'd ever heard of Nickelback. Maybe, I actually had, I think, because they were on Roadrunner, and there was a guy that worked for TVT that had come over from Roadrunner, and I remember, and at some point, a guy named Mark Abramson, and he'd mentioned to me, it's like, oh yeah, these guys are going to be huge, and I'm like, wow, whatever, Nickelback, who's that, or whatever. And so I get back in the States, and the record comes out, it's like number 1. I was like, oh my God. And so anyway, I guess the point of all that is, if there's somebody doing something, it's one thing to be in a band, and if, let's say, you could be Jack White, or you could be Nickelback, there would be some people, maybe, I would gravitate more being Jack White. Maybe you're coming into town, you're playing Kane's Ballroom in Tulsa, you're playing Tulsa Theater, or you're doing tours, you're not out doing arenas, and it's, but, you're kind of being able to do things on your own terms. You don't have the same pressure at radio that a band like Nickelback would have, those kinds of things. But being Nickelback wouldn't be bad either. Yeah.
I watched the same documentary, and so my daughter and I, our musical tastes are starting to overlap. That Venn diagram overlaps more and more now. And she said, was it really? And I said, it really was that big of a thing, just to hate on them for no reason whatsoever. And I remember telling her, I said, you don't sell tens of millions of records worldwide if you don't know what you're doing. That's just the fact of the matter. You don't sell tens of millions worldwide and sustain that. I mean, granted, I don't think since MTV, no one is going to have a 40-year career on top, but you don't sell tens of millions of records if you don't know what you're doing, if there isn't something there.
No. What's funny is that with bands like Nickelback, or, we talked about Creed, or those kinds of bands, and you see it too, because you stay really positive on social media too, and that's maybe why, we hold our ground. You have grace for people. Mm-hmm. I think it's, that's what strikes me about you as a person, is I feel like you give people grace, and you're open to other ideas, even though you feel strongly about something. You give people pushback, but you don't demean people. But it strikes me about bands like that, and even us to a certain degree, in the whole Wax Trax, Chicago, sort of those circles, people gave us way too much credit, and people give bands like Creed and Nickelback way too much credit. They're like, oh, well, they have a formula and they know what's going to work. And it's like, no, they don't.
no.
They get in a studio, and maybe what they do sounds formulaic, but it's their formula.
Yeah, there's no universal
because
equation.
If there was,
to it.
like, why would I can't even mention the top. What if I looked at the Billboard Top 200 now? I'd be like, who's that and who's that and who's that, or the TikTok chart and all that stuff. I don't know any of this.
Yeah.
I'm an old man. I don't know who these bands are, but if somebody, they're TikTok guys or female artists or whoever they are that are playing. I can remember even years ago, I'd be up in Tulsa working or whatever, and maybe I would go, I'd be like in the Brady district having dinner or something, and it'd be a line, a line wrapped all the way down from Cane's, down almost to Tulsa, down to the Tulsa Theater, people waiting to get in, and you're like, who's playing tonight? They'd go, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, who's that?
Never heard of
the, and so I guess the point of it is, it's like, man, if you're out there and you can actually do that stuff, and, we're talking about what success is now. I mean, there are guys, and I'm going to name drop somebody in Tulsa that people know, and this is, sorry if you're outside of our fishbowl, but a guy named Steve McCabe, who, that guy has managed to eke out a living. Travis Kidd's another guy. Brandon Clark's another guy. Mm-hmm. Guy Pryor lives here in Oklahoma City. Those guys have been able to make a living playing music for literally over 30 years. All those guys I mentioned. They've never had a hit on the radio. Steve McCabe maybe has never released a record of his own material. Guy Pryor's never released a record of his own material. Obviously, Brandon's got his thing. Travis is doing his thing. But those guys, that's success. That is, and maybe those guys would, Brandon and I especially, maybe Steve too, talked more about this than maybe any, all the people that I've made touches with in Tulsa, and there's still part of them that would trade places with me, because I did it. I was on MTV, and I've played in front of 30,000 people, and I did the Beach House with Kennedy on MTV, and all that kind of stuff. And that seems really, it's like, wow, that's what, making it is.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. How I know I've made it.
Yeah, and these guys, man, they are, those guys, they must look back now and wonder how the hell they did it. Where Steve's still showing up for gigs 4 days a week. Or Travis, might play 6 nights a week. And it's hard work, people. Oh, yeah. Believe me, he doesn't just show up and, play for 3 hours and go home. I mean, he's moving gear. It's all that stuff. He's chasing dollars. He's having to sell himself constantly. He's got to be on the phone. He's doing his own social media. He's doing all this. I mean, it is beyond a full-time job. And he's got a successful marriage, and he's all these things. And, and if you were to ask him at 20 what making it was, it would have looked like what I did.
Fact. Yes, very much so.
And now, look, and I'm grateful, and I don't think any less of what I did, but I see those guys and I'm like, man, those guys made it. Those guys, and those guys would, and maybe even Steve McCabe would say to me, he's like, man, but you're out there doing your own music, and it was like this, and I would tell Steve, it's like, dude, by the time you played Guilty 1,000 times, you're out there performing songs like people heard it on the record, and that's what they want to hear. And that's exactly what you're doing, Steve.
Yeah.
I did exactly what you did. I just happened to be in the best Gravity Kills cover band that ever existed.
Oh, hold on. I love that expression. The best Gravity Kills band that ever existed was Gravity Kills. That's. Do you understand what a healthy way that is of looking at things? Because I will tell you, BC Brandon and I have had the conversation. He said, "Man, it doesn't get any better. I pay my bills by playing music with my friends. That's living the dream. That's living every high schooler's dream." And you can see Taylor Swift levels of whatever, or David Allan Coe levels of whatever, but that's what the dream really is. And I love the fact, and I would be willing to bet Travis and Brandon, I know Steve and I know each other, but not close. They'd all say the same thing. Yeah, man, this is what, and they've developed it where if a show were to cancel, somebody calls at 4:00, "Hey, Brandon, power outage, we can't have you tonight." By 4:10, he's got another gig line.
Yeah, or he would just say, "Man, I need a night off." So it's like, "Thank you, God, I got a night off," and but all those guys. I mean, and I'm leaving a lot of people out of the Tulsa scene that that have made real dents locally and have really, really done. These people have done well. And because back in the day, I mean, I knew guys with songs on the radio and songs with record deals. I'm not going to mention band names, but I knew a band. They were on. This is two different bands. I knew a band. They did Ozfest in '97, I think. And I wasn't necessarily friends with them, but I knew them. We didn't do Ozfest, but because of my manager, Gloria, who was married to Geezer Butler, we were around all of that. It was around the Ozzy Osbourne, Sharon Osbourne camp a lot. And this band, Warner Brothers had spent $1 million on this band. Put them on Ozfest. Record comes out, like the first week it sells like, making this, I'm just coming up with a number, but it was super low. It was like 1,300 copies or something. And they literally, Warner pulls their tour support, immediately drops them. These guys are like stranded in like Arizona, and they don't even really have enough. They don't even know how they're going to get home. They're living off tour support and, literally living off of tour support. And they had made it. They had gotten their deal. They're on Ozfest, all that stuff. And it just, drives these guys out of the business because now all of a sudden they've got nothing. They just, and they don't even know how they're going to literally put gas in the van to get back to Los Angeles where they were from. And there's tons of those stories out there. And luckily we were never one of those bands. We quit on our own terms. We knew things weren't going well. And we just decided, we were going to get in a lifeboat, before we hit the iceberg. And we weren't friends anymore. We're super great friends now, but at the time we weren't good friends anymore. And there was so much pressure and so, yeah, I mean, I would have liked things to have lasted longer, but they, it would have been great to be at the level that we were at. We were playing big clubs. Maybe we'd come into Tulsa, you play like, maybe we'd play either Canes or we would play back then the Brady Theater. And if you could still, and if we would have kind of kept like that going. There's a band Seven Dust, and I was label mates with them on TVT, and I mean those guys, they have gold records that they've never had tons of, especially alternative radio. They never really had MTV aside from specialty show stuff. Didn't tour in Europe until really maybe a couple years ago. This band, the first record came out in like 1998 ish. But they're still out doing it because they've got a fan base. They fill, they can go in and go out and do 30 city runs and sell 1,500 tickets a night and sell a bunch of merch. And every person that came to the show knows every song, has bought virtually every record, every T-shirt. These guys make a good living. Fat Clint from that band has moved to St. Louis, and I haven't seen him yet, but those guys, that's the kind of, that's more the Jack White kind of career. Those guys do what they want. They don't have to bow to, sort of the label, the hierarchy that a lot of bands, even now, I mean, pop music is, I mean, golly, my wife and I were talking about Katy Perry the other day. I mean, she went from, being maybe Taylor Swift, pre-Taylor Swift. I mean, she was never playing stadiums, but to becoming like a meme. And it was all because she was dependent on top 40 radio, and she was dependent on youth culture. And she's certainly younger than me, but she's not Sabrina Carpenter. And she never really built that kind of fan base. And we can talk about Taylor Swift. I mean, Jesus, if somebody did everything right, it was Taylor Swift.
I will tell you. So Blake McDaniel, who was with CAA and did her first club tour, Taylor's, he and I chatted because my daughter and I went and saw her in Toronto. And I love Taylor Swift, the music she puts out, who she is as a person, the show she does. But he said, and I was trying to explain to my daughter, like Justin Bieber or Miley or whoever comes out, they're kind of the kid star. They're the it thing among the young crowd. They want to let the world know that they're a grown up or an adult. They don't want to be pigeonholed, and they make these big jumps, and the fans get kind of left behind, a little confused, and they're not sure what's going on. Taylor took these fans, on this journey with her as she kind of crossed over genres. But again, Blake McDaniel, he said, the one thing I will say, obviously Taylor has her talent as a songwriter. She has her talent as a performer, but no one will ever outwork her. She's involved in all the decisions. And if she feels like something isn't getting enough attention, she'll make sure that it does get the attention. And if she feels like something is getting, okay, now it's oversold and we need to back off, she will. But because I told my daughter, I said, setting aside the fact that it's the biggest grossing tour in world history, I can tell you, you and I together, Jeff, can count on one hand groups that can sell out 85,000 person stadiums. For an entire tour,
there'd be like, we could name it. It's a try. Taylor Swift, U2 at one point, Rolling Stones at one point. All right.
Maybe
Metallica,
Paul McCartney.
Maybe Guns N' Roses at one point. Maybe. Yeah. Did I mention Coldplay already?
But no, but Coldplay again, and I don't think Coldplay GNR would have had the tenure that Taylor's had. People forget she's been doing this 17, 18 years now. And getting bigger each year. Now, do I think the next thing's going to top Eras? I mean, I don't know. I would think not, but she obviously knows what she's doing, and she has her plan in place.
And I guess the brilliance of Taylor Swift is really between the lines, like you said. It's the music as a songwriter. Again, she gets so much hate. She is an amazing songwriter, and granted, she writes music with people, but people in bands typically write songs with people. But what's brilliant about her is there's meaning to when she's off. Her social media keeps feeding the machine. She keeps her fans on the hook. There's these, she does something on social media that's an Easter egg to open to get to some other place. I mean, my wife's a Swiftie, and she is, she can't wait for the new record to be out, and she's followed along this whole time. We went to, she didn't see the Eras tour. She saw the tour before that, but we did go to the movie, and it was me and 100 women.
Oh, yeah. Literally exact same scenario when I was out in Tulsa.
And they're up dancing, and it was all that stuff. And people could like as an artist, I can't imagine captivating my fan base to the point where they're literally hanging on not every song that I wrote, but every word that I spoke, every image that I projected through social media, you know, and and one thing always leads to the next thing, which leads to the next thing. There's nothing about, and then but then people are like, well, then it's all contrived. It's like, no, it's genius.
That's exactly what the concept of saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this tour. I'm going to play the exact same set list every night." I thought, "Oh man, Taylor just shot herself in the foot." Shows you how much I know. Not only was it a genius move because people came knowing what to expect, knowing when they could expect it, but it drove demand to have fans see it in two dimensions. They're like, I don't even need to be there. But put it out at the movie theater. I'll go see the
which
movie.
she released,
multiple times.
on her. She didn't go through she didn't go through one of the major studios to release that. She did, and I even saw people like, when I guess she recently bought her catalog back, and we're getting off into Taylor Swift land, which is really strange for two, middle-aged guys sit here and talk about Taylor Swift, but she caught an immense amount of hate, for it's like there were so many misconceptions about the record industry. And, they thought, well, her dad shouldn't, I think I read something somewhere, well, her dad shouldn't have sold her catalog off. It's like Taylor never owned the masters to her, Big Machine owned those masters.
Right.
And she was just mad she didn't get the opportunity to buy the masters when she could have afforded them. But that's just being on the wrong end of a business deal. So I don't I'm not one of those people. We're sitting here praising her. I'm not going to let her paint herself as a victim necessarily for not, for being on the wrong end of that deal. But at the same time, now that she got her masters back, like people just don't understand. It's like, that, they think that, somehow that she owned the masters and sold them off, or her dad sold them off, and there was all this crazy stuff flying around the internet, and that she was catching hate from people for that. And I was like, man, we're going through that now with our first record, because there's a statute now that you can a band can get their masters back after 35 years from the release date, but you have to start the paper. They've set this thing up with a lot of roadblocks, because you have to go out very early and notify the label that you're starting the process. We're not even to 30 years with the first record, and we've already submitted we've already filed that paperwork with the record label, all that stuff that we're going to be doing that. And it would have been, I would love to own, I don't know what we'd do with them. I would love to own the masters. We're talking about going back to your first one of the five questions. The Orchard / Sony will no longer be doing that section of Sony. They will no longer be doing physical product at all. So we're in talks with them we are going to have to license the masters to our second record so that we can release Perversion on vinyl. So we just started that process because we don't own the masters. But while we're getting off into that crazy stuff, the record label couldn't produce the masters if we asked them to, because TVT Records went belly up in 2007. TVT Records was bought at auction. The Orchard got the catalog, the publishing part of that. We were TVT Music as a publisher as well. That went to Prudential Securities for a while. We were owned by our publishing's owned by a real publisher now, which is great. But so anyway, they couldn't even, like, when we did the first record, they didn't have unmastered files well, luckily we did. So and they were trapped on
I was going to say, is the technology something that is accessible 30 years later?
It took Doug about 2 years Everything was trapped on an old sonic solution system that was fired up by a it was a Mac computer that predated the G series. So it was something that predated 1998. I think it was a computer from like 19. I think he had bought that Mac in maybe 1993 or 1994. And the Sonic Solution System, we had. He could locate the stuff on. He could locate the files on the hard drive of the computer, but he could not. He couldn't basically get them out of the computer. Still had the old Sonic Solution System. There were parts of it he was missing. Took him 2 years. I think they were scouring the internet, scouring different places. So they basically had to Frankenstein this thing together to get the files out of the Sonic Solution System into Pro Tools, or just export them where they could be, a lossless file that we could go and then have remastered. Because you didn't want the CD to be remastered, because CDs suck as far as, we ruined CDs in the 90s. They're all super loud. You compress the hell out of them. So the files, if you put them in, in like Pro Tools, they just look like these blocks of noise. So so we put the project off for 2 years because it was like, we're not going to put out vinyl from something that's been remastered for vinyl, but they're actually mastered for CD files. So we got the files, and it just was a big deal. But so back to the Taylor Swift thing, it's like, man, people don't understand how important it is if a band can own their masters. And Taylor went out and got all that stuff, and now she owns all that stuff. But she also has the Taylor versions of everything else. But I think my wife would correct me. There's still maybe 2 albums that she didn't do Taylor versions of, and I think Red.
There's one. Red.
Did she do the very first record too? The very first country record. This is, what's it called? Like, This Is Taylor Swift, or something like that.
She didn't, but I think there was a different story for that. That wasn't with Big Machine. I think it was with something else. And I haven't studied this, but I know when she announced that she had gotten her catalog back, she said, I'm not going to have a Red Taylor's version.
Yeah. I mean, my wife kept waiting for it. And, but now, of course, she's supporting Taylor now. She can listen to it on Spotify or whatever. And she's supporting Taylor. And, so that's, it's funny now. You got 2 middle-aged dudes sitting here talking about Taylor Swift, but it's, man, if you're going to do something in the, she has achieved more in the music industry than maybe anyone ever. Maybe, I mean, arguably.
I tell people the closest analogy I can give is COVID-19. Anybody who said they knew how big, how impactful, how huge it was going to be about COVID-19 didn't know what they were talking about. And the same with, and again, I had that conversation with Blake McDaniel, and I said, do you have any inkling? He goes, nobody did. We knew she was had a good shot at being successful, but nobody knew it was going to be this global phenomenon where countries are begging you to come for the financial impact. And, it became iconoclastic in and of itself. Yeah, I don't think anyone was.
If she were to tell her story, though, and like again, what dominoes for her fell in the right places, and they had to be a bunch of them.
It's one of those. I doubt if I'll ever get the chance to ask her. I doubt if Taylor will be sitting there going, Johnny, let's talk about it. But I would be willing to bet the same thing, because everyone I've talked to, I mean, on the industry side, on the agent side, whatever, the talent is there, but the timing, and there's a little bit of luck in everybody's situation. I mean, and sometimes that's 5% luck. Sometimes it's 45% luck. But
yeah, dude,
man, I know we're sneaking up on a couple hours,
and I don't even know if we got to everything you wanted to talk about. We got off on some crazy tangents, but
we got on most of it. We can always do a part 2 later. But before you go, you got time for 5 more questions. These are the final.
Okay, all right.
These are all Jeff Scheel questions, not gravity questions. Number 1, checking your humility at the door. What's the greatest compliment you've ever received?
Man. And I don't take compliments well, so maybe that's why I don't know. Greatest compliment. Actually, I will. You've been in the business a long time in this area, and you probably knew David Box or know of him. Okay.
Yeah, Boxtown, of course.
And so David said to me, he's like, you're too humble. That was, and I took that as a compliment, because I was like, yeah, because David was a salesman. David is a salesman. I mean, he's become he's a very super hyper successful type A entrepreneur guy, and he's selling himself constantly, and I just never did that. So maybe that was the biggest compliment I ever got.
I could see that for sure. And now, this is an odd question given the conversation we've just had, but how long were you in your chosen career before you realized you could do it and make a living doing it?
Because I've had multiple chosen careers. I think,
and this can be with GK. This can be as an agent. This can be.
I think what's funny is I think I always thought I could make a living doing music because I did from very early on. Like, back when there was a lot of money, and especially at the college level, playing cover music. As I played in a cover band, I played in an original band. Original band, you barely make enough to, cover your bar tab. And if you had to pay to park in Dallas somewhere, maybe you covered all that for the night. So I think it was at that point, I was like, yeah, I can make a living doing that. But, and then with Box Talent, I think I was stupid thinking that I knew that I could make a living at it. And I did make a living and got to be pretty good at a lot of those things. But being on the artist side and being on either the agent side or promoting a show side, they're two completely different skill sets. And just because I thought I knew about the music industry, it didn't prepare me for actually. But back to the first question, I think my humility actually made it easier for me to assimilate being on the business side of the music business versus because at one time I think maybe I had an ego and it may have come out in bad places at certain times, but compared to other artists, I don't think I did. And so I think maybe it was that, but that was being ignorant really. I thought, I could do this. And I did make it a living at it, but the learning curve was far greater than I thought it was going to be going into it.
Fair enough. I agree, by the way. I've been approached 3 times in my career and asked to be a manager. And I've said, I don't know anything about being a manager. And they said, and I said, a tour manager is one thing. Being a manager is a completely different world. And I literally don't know anything about it. And my learning curve would be to your detriment. So I wouldn't feel comfortable, even having a conversation further. But what is your one perfect musical moment? By that, I mean a moment so tied to a song, you can't help but hear the song and instantly recall where you were or what you were doing.
On any song. It doesn't have to be a Karate Kill song.
No, not at all.
Yeah, this is, let's see. Oh gosh. There's a couple moments. The first time I ever heard a song, and I remember where I was, this is going to sound very cliche, and people are going to roll their eyes at this. As someone who was called 8 Inch Nails by Kennedy from MTV, first time I ever heard Down in It off of 9 Inch Nails' Pretty Hate Machine. It was 1989. I was living in an apartment in North Dallas, and I was playing in bands. I was playing original music. I was very Anglophile driven. I was listening. Stuff I was listening to was very British. But a lot of techno. I was more on the techno side, more the Depeche Mode side of the tracks than the Ministry Front 242 side of the tracks that people would associate my band with. But I remember hearing that, and I can tell you exactly where I was. I was about 2 blocks from the apartment. I don't remember where I was going, but I was in my car KDGE in Dallas had just popped up in 1989. And that's another story. I remember where I was. It was also in my car. And I remember the first song I ever heard at alternative radio in Dallas, because I was like, what the hell is this song doing on the radio? It was Dance With Me by Lords of the New Church. I was like, what is this? And because I knew the song. So, yeah, I heard Down in It. Was coming up on a Circle K at, which is now the Dallas North Parkway. Didn't go all that far north yet. I lived right where the George Bush going across, where was it? Going across from like the Louisville area, not 121, but the loop that's further in Dallas. I lived, but none of that stuff was there. It was just it was cornfields, and I heard Down in It. I'd never heard of Nine Inch Nails before. And I was in bands that we didn't incorporate a lot of guitars. Grew up a metalhead very early, and started listening to more stuff with guitars. I got into techno and then started listening to more bands with guitars. But I was like, whew, this guy's got to figure. This really encapsulates. This speaks to me, and so that's probably never hearing an artist before and hearing something for the first time and going, and it changed the trajectory of what I did musically in an instant. And, because I bought that first record, but then it took me back. That's when I started listening to Ministry records and that kind of stuff, and sort of, coming from this kind of pop romantic techno thing, and sort of kind of captured the stuff that I was listening to when I was a kid. It was, the first live band I ever saw in an arena were the Scorpions, but they weren't the headliner. They were opening for Sammy Hagar. The middle band was Pat Travers' band, and I was like a freshman in high school, and give away my age, but so I was really into that stuff. And, just like you, I went to see Van Halen, and I've seen all those bands, and it kind of tied everything together in an instant for me. But I remember being in my car. I can remember turning, like, I'm listening to the radio and it came on, and when you're driving, music can become background because you're driving somewhere, and maybe you're running errands or whatever, you're going to meet friends or whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And instantly I was like, what is this? And I remember I can picture myself reaching down and turning the volume up and sort of losing myself, and, still driving a car, but we've all driven a car and got to the grocery store and completely blacked out between the house and the grocery store. And that's what happened to me for 4 minutes. As I'm driving and I'm looking at the road, but my mind's going, what is this? Who's this artist? And, it's just and so, there are going to be some people out there, the 8-inch Nails guy, talking about 9-inch Nails, but, Trent's another guy that, maybe he's not, he doesn't have the relevance. It's still relevant to me. It's not relevant to my daughter. It's not relevant to your daughter. Yeah, it's not relevant on a, there's, and there's probably kids that are listening to 9-inch Nails that have discovered it or whatever, but, anybody that can still be out, that record came out in 1989, and it's still, and he's done, I don't know how many studio records he's done, 7 or 8, and, can go out and still fill big venues. And I got to, my wife surprised me, took me to see the last tour at the Aragon Theater in Chicago, as a last minute surprise. So, I'm still a fanboy. Anyway, next question.
I met Reznor once at a Hollywood film, and it was like hey, nice to meet you. You kind of moving through the room. But I remember thinking, this guy helped create so many impactful musical moments for my generation. And he was just laid back and totally cool.
Yeah,
From what
and without jumping on this conversation, I mean, the amount of records that he is inspired, even recently, the last Lady Gaga record, he and Atticus, not the latest Halsey record, but the Halsey record, the record she released before the new record, was produced by Trent and Atticus.
oh yeah,
And Spotify thinks I love Halsey because I listened to that record more than any other record. Was the year it came out, and it totally screwed up my Spotify algorithms because I still get if like you finish a record and it'll start throwing in stuff that they think you like, and so all of a sudden Halsey stuff starts seeping in my play. It's like I'm mowing the grass, all of a sudden I'm listening to Halsey. It's like no,
it's not going to work.
right.
Number 4, what is one truth or piece of advice that you wish everyone was so familiar with it became a cliche?
Golly.
I promise the last question's easier.
This is hard because I mean, there's a million things. If you'd ask me that, I think you'd ask me that at 30, I would be able to have an answer like that.
Right.
But the older I get, maybe the more sure I am of myself, the less I understand. Maybe, ironically, the less I understand about how this all happened and how I'm still sitting here, talking to you today. Man, the one, I guess, based on our conversation, the one thing that I wish people would give me it should be restate the question because I want to make sure I'm answering this correctly.
What is one truth or piece of advice that you wish everyone was so familiar with it's become a cliche?
And maybe this is cliche, but live in the moment. Live in the moment. Every second that you can, because you get to be a older middle-aged guy, and I'm on the cusp of middle-aged into old guy. It goes by. Maybe this is another thing. It goes by so fast, and if you're not in the moment, man, and you never get to. You don't get a second chance, and that's maybe the cliche is that you only go around once, and you don't really understand it. I don't think until maybe you've lived a pretty colorful life, and much of that was you were in the moment, but you for many reasons weren't capable of being in the moment, or you were thinking about, there was a horizon that existed that you never were able to, there was some horizon that you were always reaching for that as you kept stepping towards the horizon line just keeps moving.
The world keeps spinning. Yeah. The opposite direction.
Yeah. And that's the one thing my wife has given me the gift I can live in the moment now. And so maybe that's it. I don't know.
The funny part before this last question, even when I was like Pavarotti's arrival in North America for his farewell tour, and I like to think I was in that moment at that press conference. Now it just kind of seems like something I read or like
right on
memory, but it's not something I connect with in that way anymore.
Yeah, well, maybe the gravity of that moment has changed, and I think that so it changes your perception when you go back and look at it. At the time, it was a very important moment, musically for a lot of people, and then now, as the ink fades on the page a little bit, and you become preoccupied. Maybe that's not the right word. You become occupied. Mm-hmm. And guys like you or me that are able to sort of slow things down now a little bit more, and you kind of understand the gravity of every minute that you live in now, and which makes moments like that seem less important, because as you get older, it's like every minute, every moment, from the small, like me getting to share something with my daughter or hang out with my wife, because we kind of have this weird long distance relationship. I'm back and forth, and when I'm with her, man, I am locked in, and we're and it's not that I even have to try. It's just like, this is the exact place on this planet that I want to be at this moment in time. And I know I got to worry about something tomorrow, something I got to deal with. But she's the one person that out of every person I've ever met in my life that's able to just, make me stop and appreciate this, and maybe having kids, you start to, that kind of happens for you a little bit as you get a little bit older.
Definitely.
But even my daughter, I was able to do a lot of things with her, but I was never able to just completely put the brakes on, keep the world from spinning for a while. So that's, I guess maybe that's the best I can answer that question.
No, man, that's last night. My daughter and I sat home and watched The Wiz, the Michael Jackson Diana. And I remember actively thinking, there's no place else I'd rather be than her and I stopping the movie to make little jokes or sing along or whatever in this moment. And I wish I would have had that appreciation.
Yeah. And when we were younger, like the Pavarotti moment, in a way, might have been more for you than, like, I think maybe some of those moments I had, when I look back on, people will say, well, what's a really cool moment you had when you were touring? It wasn't about playing shows. It'd be like being on a cruise ship. We talk about being on a cruise ship in the Baltic, watching the sun come up over the Baltic as you're going into Finland, and you're sitting there going, holy shit, who gets to do this?
This is real, and I'm doing it right now.
But those kind of moments were very, wasn't me sharing a moment with, like, it was, I think about it in my own head. It was stuff that, as opposed to me going, man, I'm here with my wife, or I'm here with my kids, or I'm doing whatever. This is crazy awesome, and I'm having the best time, and this is exactly where I want to be. A lot of those moments when I was younger were sort of happening inside my own head. And so maybe that's the difference now as you get a little bit older. And like you with your daughter, you're like, man, I'm sharing a moment. And talking about listening versus talking at people and listening. I'm sharing a moment with somebody versus me having a moment. And maybe I had more of those. I had moments, and I did share moments. I mean, I'm not going to say that I didn't, but when I think about these profound moments in my life, I share more moments the older I get, and had more moments when I was younger. And so maybe that's, I don't know, I'm getting a little bit too, we're going down rabbit holes, but that's maybe I get a little overcomplicated in answering questions, and I'm trying to keep it simple, but I think that's probably it.
I think that's the best part of getting older is we appreciate our moments for what they are. Number 5, hopefully this will be easier, by the way, and feel free to use any answer from a previous question if you'd like. Okay. If you could join any artist on stage for any song, who would the artist be and what song would you sing together?
Woo.
I'm trying to make it easier to end on that one.
Gosh, because, if I think about artists that influenced me or people I really, really, really looked up to as artists, because you go through the Beatles to, being younger, and I'm trying to think of the artists that, sort of, you talk about Zeppelin. I was never really a Rolling Stones fan. I appreciate the Rolling Stones. Obviously, I'm a Nine Inch Nails fan. But probably where vocally I would probably feel like, oh my God, it would be my dream, would probably be, and if I were going to name a song, it would either be Rush, not the band Rush, although I'm a huge Rush fan. 2 songs off of Depeche Mode, Songs of Faith and Devotion. There's a song called Rush, and there's a song called Walking in My Shoes. There's also there's 3 songs, but it'd be any probably one of the songs off of Songs of Faith and Devotion. If I could do that record, maybe with Depeche Mode and Dave Gahan. You know, even more than like, I mean, you know, I look at bands like Queen and artists like David Bowie. Prince would be somebody else. You know, Prince, amazing musician, guitar player. Probably, yeah, because that Depeche Mode is vocally, despite what I did for a living, vocally, I think Depeche Mode is in my that is my vocal wheelhouse, and probably maybe the most influential band on me personally. You know, both professionally and in my personal life would be that band. So yeah, that's maybe I can't pinpoint a song. I can certainly pinpoint the artist.
Well, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that at some point it somehow gets to happen, because now you could appreciate the moment.
Right.
Even
more. Yeah. Although I did have a moment. I would tell you this. This is talking about a moment with a band that was a huge influence. We got to play Eden Fest in Toronto with The Cure. And I had to do an interview afterwards, but we did the interview where I could see the show, and I was basically having to stop the person doing the interview and go, "Can we just like take a minute?" Because they do a song, what? Yeah, because they're like wanting to do this interview during the set, and just like, oh my god, you know, this is, and I'd seen The Cure before, but you know, you never know when you're going to get to see those bands. And I was trying to be in the moment because I was like, I'll get to see The Cure again or whatever, and make this thing about myself. But I was like, man, I want to watch this band, and I don't, you know, I don't want to sit here and talk about a bunch of bullshit. I want to like, I want to see this band, and that, yeah, and that was a moment I think that, you know, doesn't have anything to do with, you know, it doesn't have anything to do with playing a show. But it definitely was a moment in my life. I was like, you know, this is a moment I should pay attention to. And so anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Who said that? Who was that was like, that was a Kevin Nealon thing, I think, from Saturday Night Live.
Yes.
Yeah.
Man, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Dude, it was a blast. You know,
I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Where, you know, you'll send me all this stuff because I want to make sure people can, you know, there'll be some people that will be interested to see this, that are just fans. My wife will get a kick out of seeing the stuff. She's like, Jeff, you know, I talk way too much, and, you know, she'll just sit there and she'll even tell me like, hey, you do these podcasts. She's like, you get a little chatty and you kind of go off in places but it's kind of how my mind works. So
that's the best part of this conversation is like I said, man, I had a couple bullet points, but I'm into the rabbit holes and the side tracks and the trail that leads us over here, and how two guys our age are going to wind up talking about Taylor Swift. Absolutely no idea, but it winds up making sense organically.
Yeah. And we could be football fans and like Taylor Swift at the same time.
Man, our whole world has become, it's McConnell or Pelosi. It's Cowboys or Rangers. No, man, you can be both. Like, you don't have to, it's not McDonald's or Burger King. There's other options, and you can like both.
That's right. That's right. I drink Coke and Pepsi.
That's right. And you know what? Sometimes I can't even tell the difference.
That's right. Cool, man. Yeah. And thanks for having me on, you know, and the best of luck. And you're going to kill it doing this. And, you know, sometime you should have people just sit and ask you questions, because you're probably going to be, you know, in a lot of cases, including today, you're probably far more interesting than the guest that you have on. So
I you know, it's everybody thinks everybody else is interesting, but to me, I will tell you one of my takeaways. I don't know any artist ever their first 10 songs they wrote were their first album. I mean, it's just, to me, little bits like that are fascinating. And again, everybody I've talked to, from John Cooper with the Red Dirt Rangers to Joan Jett, it had to happen. You couldn't have planned it. You couldn't have tried to make it work. It had to happen the way it did for it to go down. But so I mean, the story for me is fascinating. And there's not to say, I mean, we only hit 2 hours. We may have a part 2 because we got a lot more rabbit holes.
We could get into we could get into industry. We can get into manhood. We could get into, Yeah, fatherhood is a big one. Politics is a Coke or Pepsi thing that I just,
Mm-hmm.
I'm an old man, and religion and politics are things that I grew up, that were, you know, people people didn't talk about those
Yeah,
things, and maybe
yes.
and I have my causes, but I keep them to myself, and you just try to be a good human being. And I think if everybody just realized that people come from, if people could realize that most people, the majority, 99.9% of people, are trying to come from a place of good, and what they think. I'm just not smart enough to. I'm just not smart enough to grasp um, everything politically, and so I just, you know, the only thing I'll say about politics is my daughter told me who to vote for, and I'm an old person, and so I went to the polls and I voted on behalf of my daughter, and that's all I'll say.
I will tell you, I was a political science guy in college. My dad's family, very politically active, and I can't keep up with it. I mean, and none of it has to do with politics anymore. It has to do with throwing mud and blaming other people for problems we may not even have in real life. I mean, I don't even know sometimes.
Yeah, or problems I can't understand, and I'm not going to try to pretend to understand. I try to be empathetic, sympathetic, because we're all, to quote a comedian that is quite controversial, Dave Chappelle, you suffer, I suffer. And that's it, man.
Period,
And some people, right, and some people suffer less, and you can't do comparative suffering. And he talks about that too. I've been blessed in my life, dude. I mean, I have been super blessed. In fact, tomorrow, I got some stuff to deal with my daughter still, with her car, getting that all ready so I can be in and out of town. I'm going to be working on music for a couple of weeks, and at my age, I can focus on that. I am blessed.
Oh yeah. You got to count the blessings with the problems. If not, you're just, and again, who was it? Muhammad Ali said, if you look at life at 50, like you did at 30, you wasted 20 years of your life.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's for sure.
I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
Man,
dude.
Thanks so much, brother. I'll talk to you again, Jeff.
All right, man. Take care.